Hello everyone, I'm Kevin O'Neill, and I'm a visually impaired front-end developer. In this talk, I wanted to go over some of the challenges and some of the solutions that I came up with during my 5 years of working in the, I was working as a web developer. And so as I mentioned, my name is Kevin O'Neill. This is my Twitter handle. Sorry, it's a little bit strange. That's 2 underscores twice. So if you have any questions or any suggestions, please send me a message. That'll be great. So let's begin. So I work at Fast Retailing. It's a large apparel company based in Japan. And if you've been to Japan before, you've probably noticed the brand Uniqlo. And we have some stores in the US as well. So if you happen to come across any of the stores, please do check out some of the items that we have for sale. I'm actually wearing one of them right now. So get into this topic. All right, so one thing I wanted to say was 6 years ago, I was at university, and I had a lot of self-doubt. And so, for example, I kind of felt like perhaps I wasn't good enough to kind of like be a developer or to kind of like find a job just because of some of the experiences that I went through. And what I wanted to say, like with this presentation, is please don't fall into that trap. It's easy to get discouraged and to kind of not try to push yourself, and perhaps a lot of things can cause that. I wanted to ask everybody, if you happen to know somebody else who is ably challenged or has a lot of other difficulties or challenges, please share this story with them. So right here, I'm just going to go through some of the conditions that I have. These are actually, there's 3 of them in total, and this is what I was born with. There is no corrective surgery for them at this time. So it's something that I'm going to have to be stuck with until there is something like that. So the first one is nystagmus, which is a vision condition in which makes the eyes repetitive, uncontrolled movements. So sometimes, like, if you look at me, like at my eyes, they'll probably go like in random places, or they'll be stuck in one other completely different direction. So there's that. The second one is myopia, which is nearsightedness, and this is I have quite of an extreme version of nearsightedness that makes it quite difficult. Thankfully, I have these glasses here that can extend my vision quite a bit, but mostly it's for if I'm out and about or outside. Unfortunately, when it comes to like using a computer screen or working, I'm so used to not having them on, and you don't tend to work really well for those situations. And the last one, I actually have difficulty even still pronouncing it. Maybe it's amblyopia, and it's also known as like the lazy eye. So those are the 3 things that I have, and we can actually simulate this a little bit. So I'm going to take off my glasses right now, and if you actually extend, take out one of your arms and extend it, beyond that point, I can actually barely see. It's extremely blurry. If I'm looking out right now, I can, it's all just a big blob or a big blur. And the second part of my condition is that if you take one hand and you place it over your eye, that's actually the field of vision that I have, like entirely. So it's very narrow and cut in half, basically. So about, let's say, almost a year ago, I ran into this article by the Pew Research Center, and I found it pretty shocking and sad. And as you can see in the headline, there's quite a large digital divide between people with disabilities or challenges, and if you haven't heard of the term like digital divide, I'm sure you have. It's the gap between the people who have access to technology or the internet and those who don't. So what I hope with this presentation is in a way to close that gap. And I'll come back to this later, at a later point, how I hope to achieve this in the near future. So this is one of the, this is the quote from the article that kind of stood out for me. Disabled Americans are about 3 times as likely as those with a disability to say they never go online, 22% versus 8%, according to a Pew Research Center survey conducted in the fall of 2016. So that's quite a big gap. And so I'm going to start with my story here. So I graduated from Cal State San Marcos. It's about maybe a 25 minute drive from here, actually. And I graduated in December of 2012. And I graduated with a visual and performing arts technology degree. So this is basically like digital graphic design. And it took me about a year to find a full-time job. And part of this is because, like, as you know, when you're trying to find your first job, it can be really, really difficult just because you're trying to stand out from other applicants. And getting your first job is always the most difficult thing. But in my case, since I was raised in Southern California, I have these eye conditions, I am not legally allowed to drive. So often when I had an interview, and the employer might be asking, reasonably so of course, like, how would you get to work? And most of the times I couldn't figure out like how to answer that question. So I started looking for places that would have a better public transportation system, something like maybe New York City, or perhaps like Portland, Seattle, just anything that could kind of help me get to work on time. And then during this time frame, I actually got in contact with someone via LinkedIn, and I ended up in Tokyo, Japan, which is quite a big jump. I'm not going to get too much into like the cultural differences in this presentation, unfortunately, but here I'm just going to talk about like a little bit of like what I found when I've been living there. Just as a disclaimer, some of the points or advice that I'm going to give out in this presentation might be just a little bit tailored to just how the Japanese job market is, or how my experiences have been. So this part is about some of the advice that I would give to myself like 5 years ago or 6 years ago when I was looking for a job. And one of those things is that if you're really challenged or you want to, need some help, I was able to take advantage of the California Department of State of Rehab. If you are from another state, I'm sure that there's another similar branch or division, and there's a lot of educational and vocational programs that they give out and help anyone with disabilities. So I wanted to give a shout out and wanted to thank the California Department of Rehab for making this possible, because without them I wouldn't be speaking here in front of all of you. Another thing, when I was at my first job and my second job, I actually did not ask for any help from my employer to make my working situation a lot easier, to become more efficient. So I'm going to show like an example of this. This is basically my setup. In my previous company, a friend of mine took this photo just to illustrate like how close I have to be to the screen. And it was great because it's just like a monitor arm that just attaches to your desk. So this way I can move around the monitor freely if I need to. And this is part of like why I think it's important. If you work like for a good employer, someone that really cares about you, they're willing to try to help you be a lot more comfortable or be more efficient at your job. And this is what allowed me to do that. So I wanted to thank my previous employer, my current employer, for making that happen. Hopefully that starts happening a lot more, and that was just like one of the most amazing things for me, being able to take advantage of that. And now I want to get into some of the tools that I was able to use during my time as a front-end developer. And so at one of my jobs, it was quite important to keep the, have pixel perfect designs. So the designer would, of course, design something in Photoshop or Illustrator, and they would send it to us, the front-end developer team, and it needed to be like pixel perfect. Like every pixel needed to work or needed to be aligned in every in a lot of browsers, including Internet Explorer. So that was kind of tough, especially as someone who is nearsighted. And so with this part, I wanted to tell another story. So it was quite late at night, maybe 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. And in order to, one of the designers would take my web page that I was working on and his design, and he printed it out at a, like physical media, just on paper, and would came over to me and started asking like, hey, this is how it should actually look, and he started taking out a ruler and kind of like comparing how close like everything should be. My coworker right next to me actually said, hey, so I have a better idea. Why don't you just use this? And this next slide is a little bit, how to say, like, I hurt your eyes a bit, so I'm going to just show it at first for a couple of seconds and then move back. So that was great because it's a little Chrome extension that you can just install, and it will basically, you could set an image and it'll just lay it on top of your website, so you can kind of like compare and see how close your final web page is to the design. And not only that, but I was able to use it with some of the accessibility tools that are found in the Mac system preferences. So that was extremely helpful compared to just dealing in the physical realm. I could just use the great tools that are already inside of the operating system, or Mac OS or Windows, or whichever OS you like to use. And that was like incredible. So here's some of the things that I like to set, for example. And if you're using a Mac OS, then you could just go to the top left. There's the Apple icon. You click on that and you go System Preferences, and you click on Accessibility, and this screen will pop up. And now there are different options a lot of different options that you can set. And down here at the bottom, there's the zoom command. So there's two different kinds of zooms that you can use. You can either have it set so it's picture-in-picture, as it's shown in here. And what that will do is it will create a little frame inside of whenever you're zooming in. And there's the full screen zoom, which is the one that I actually really like to use. And that was part of the tools that I was able to use to help me out a lot when I had to compare the designs with the Pixel Perfect extension. And here's some advanced options, just in case. So it's, just has the arrow points on the bottom right-hand side. And there's a lot of other settings that I go through, and every time I set up a new computer, I make sure that all of these are set, or hopefully I can kind of sync them up in a way. So for example, like in the Chrome settings, which is what I usually use for development, I set the font size to large, just because it's a lot more helpful so I can see. And they even have page zooms that you can adjust to whatever you want. Make it more helpful. And okay, so we're developers and we spend a lot of time in editors. And I've jumped around through a bunch of different editors. And so far, although I use Visual Studio Code all the time, I love that editor a lot. I found the extensibility in Atom to be really, really, really helpful. I'm not showing a previous slide, but there's lots of great editors that you could make very extremely customizable. And here, these are my basic settings. And you can ignore the bottom parts of it, but yeah, I usually set everything to 22 or 24 size fonts, like even for the integrated terminal and a lot of different other applications, just because that's what I'm used to. But again, everybody has their own challenges and difficulties, so it might be higher, it might be lower. And this is what it looks like when I am editing my code. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, Atom is really great at extending the user interface, and what I really hope to do in the future is perhaps make a theme that, for example, the City Lights UI theme that can help perhaps people who have my condition or other people who are ably challenged, and find ways to make their time working a lot easier. The reason why I really like this theme is because it puts the search right in the front and pretty much center of the screen, and you can kind of adjust it to make it either the text bigger or smaller. This is what I hope. I haven't found a way to do it in Visual Studio Code yet, but if you do happen to know something like to make the search a lot easier, please do let me know. And then I can share that. Okay, so here's another thing that I found when I've been working for about 5 years now. Sometimes, as we all do, we need help with, I need help with like a particular problem, so I'll go to a coworker. The thing is that because of my nearsightedness, there's either two options that we generally have, or at least that I first thought of, is either I have to get really close to their screen, or they would have to kind of adjust their settings, or something like using the command or plus tool to kind of just like zoom in the screen. But there is like a better way that I found to do this, and instead of my coworker having to reset their settings or go through their keyboard shortcuts again and reset their environments, I actually found VS Live Share to be extremely helpful for this. And Atom has teletype as well. I haven't been able to use it yet, but I'm going to give it a try really soon. And so these tools are actually really helpful for me a lot. Perhaps at first they were intended to, of course, be more of like maybe remote, if you're working remotely with other coworkers to kind of like do pair programming. But these tools are extremely helpful, and I'm very thankful that they're around, and it's very easy to get started on them and use them. So what can we do? What can we all do to kind of make accessibility better, or make improvements or start on these? So this is a great course by Google at, I believe it's Udacity. And I actually have started this a couple of months back just to learn more about what I can do, what part that I can do to kind of improve accessibility for everyone. So if you can, please recommend this to anybody that you know. It's a great course. I believe it's they have a couple of chapters, maybe a couple of hours. And also at one of the sister conferences, Marcy did an amazing talk on improving accessibility with empathy-driven development. So if you can, please check out her JSConf EU talk. And workshops. So at my previous company, we were quite a big team, or quite a small team actually, but there were probably around 24 back-end developers and 2 front-end developers, including me. So I wanted to kind of show what front-end development was like. And so I started these workshops, these internal workshops, to kind of teach back-end developers about front-end development. And I found that they turned out to be pretty successful. And what I wanted to do in the future is to start an accessibility workshop, perhaps here back in the United States or even in Japan, to kind of encourage people to get started. And so that's about it for my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.